Hey everyone, this is Derek Bros with the Independent Media Alliance, and welcome to another panel. We got a full house tonight. We're going to be diving deep into AI, and we want to get to it as quick as possible. But before we do that, just a couple of quick announcements. Ryan, I know you got something big to share with everybody.
Yes, we want to start off with this pretty great announcement shared. Rookie mistake. We're gonna get started with this opening from Odyssey, which I think is it's pretty cool. It's pretty nice, kind of overlay of not just the portal that they're starting, the decentralized internet aspect, but really kind of shouting out the Independent Media Alliance. I'll just give you a couple of the parts that I think were important. As they just said, decentralization in action. Odyssey welcomes the Independent Media Alliance to Portal. At Odyssey, we've always believed in giving creators the tools to control their own destinies. That's why we're thrilled to announce that the Independent Media Alliance, a coalition led by Whitney Webb, Derek Bros, and Ryan Christian, will soon be launching its own portal within what they're calling their emerging decentralized media ecosystem, or DME. This is more than just a new partnership, they wrote. It's a powerful demonstration of what's possible when independent voices are equipped with the right tools to protect their editorial integrity and speak directly to their communities without relying on the whims of centralized platforms or algorithmic gatekeepers, which I think, in the AI conversation, that's definitely relevant today. It says the portal is the product of years of work toward a single goal, building a publishing infrastructure that puts creators in full control. With Portal, we're moving beyond video, offering a complete decentralized publishing platform that functions more like an independent website builder, but with freedom, resilience, and sovereignty baked into the core. Every portal, including the IMAs, operates independently. Creators and collectives manage their own commenting systems, messaging, monetization, everything about it. No centralized authority deciding what's acceptable, just creators and their audiences building relationships on their own terms. The Independent Media Alliance, they wrote, is exactly the kind of project we had in mind when they built this portal. And basically, they say everybody involved with the Independent Media Alliance represents a bold, principled tradition of investigative reporting that refuses to be silenced by centralized interests. Lastly, with their portal, the IMA they wrote won't be just published content. They'll set their own terms for distribution, engagement, monetization. They'll lead a living example of what decentralized journalism looks like in practice. And we're proud, they wrote, to support that every step of the way. It says, we believe the IMA's move to Portal signals something larger. It's a turning point, not just for Odyssey, but for the media landscape as a whole. And I really agree with this in a sense that this is a new step with the decentralized internet direction and really just what we're doing. And I'll also point out that there's no financial mechanism in all of this. Odyssey supporting this because they believe in what we're doing. And I just think that's important that, we're trying to strike this out in a new direction. So anyone wants to comment on that, I think it's a pretty amazing step. And then we'll go give it back to Derek and get going. All right. Well, no thoughts on it in general. I'm just excited to announce it. But, did Derek drop off?
I think he'll be back in a second, but I just wanted to say.
Yeah, go ahead, Keith. I'll throw it to you. Go ahead.
Yep. So this is my first panel. I'm super excited to be here with the rest of you greats. And we've been watching the development of Portal, and it is really, really exciting to have that contained. And, I know how hard building software is. So I think when this platform launches Portal, it'll be the perfect way to combine forces together. And I know we all have audiences, and that's kind of the problem right now with decentralization. We're all fractured. So there's going to be some sort of unification, and I think it'll make a big splash. So I'm really, really excited.
And I'm glad you're here as well. I'm glad Whitney's joining us today. And I think this is going to be a really great panel. And so the main focus of today is focused on artificial intelligence, and really just as a broad sense, its influence, how it's changed everything, but specifically research, investigation, media, and anywhere else we think that relates. And I'll just kick it off with kind of the overarching, what really the main things that I thought, and then we'll kind of go around and everyone can give their kind of thoughts on where this should go. I see this as four main focal points for me that I think stand out, and that is just individual researchers using AI, being manipulated by it, trusting it blindly.
Ryan, Derek is back. Can you add him on?
Yeah. Give me 1 second. Let me. All right. Let me keep doing that real quick, and then we'll go back to Derek. So my point was individual researchers is an obvious important point to people being manipulated by AI online. Then there's journalists that use this and potentially lean into it too much, as well as also maybe blindly trust it. And medical aspect of AI manipulating, we talk about vaccines, medical research, and then just government in general and the 50,000 ways that could apply. But we'll also talk about the obvious benefits. of how this can be used. So go ahead, Derek. You want to kick us off?
Yeah, so thanks for that, Ryan. And I want to just go right into it. Again, we've talked about everybody here being crunched on time. I want to start by playing these two videos. I hope Patrick Wood will join us. He is, part of the Independent Media Alliance. He was on the past panel. So I don't really want to speak about Patrick without him being here, but I do believe he'll show up. And so this kind of came out of a conversation I saw happening online where different people, some who are more well-known than others, or just, people following who are like, I'm so disappointed in Patrick Wood and his latest show. He said he's going to use AI. And he made some comments about AI. This is the guy that's been warning everybody about technocracy for decades. How dare he? And I know that we have, a wide range of opinions in here. So the main focus, kind of original idea was like, just to let everybody here share, have you used AI? Where, how is it valuable? Are you super no AI in any way at all? And just kind of see where that conversation goes. So if we could just start, Ryan, by playing just those two short clips. This is actually from Patrick's show where he speaks for himself and says some things about AI that triggered some folks.
Use AI for our own purposes. As long as we can, it'll be censored, it'll be destroyed probably at some point. But for now, it's a useful tool to uncover things that you would not otherwise see on the internet. And there's personal research. If you don't use it, you're going to be left in the dark, I'm afraid, because if you do use it, well, you're going to see you have more useful information coming into your brain.
So I think that was the main thing that triggered some people right there. His saying, if you don't use it, you're going to get left behind. I think that was, a bridge too far for some people. But so I just want to use that to open the door. And of course, if Patrick shows up, give him a chance to elaborate on that. Of course, as we usually do, when you go around, guys, please just introduce who you are, where you're, working from, or, what outlet you have. And maybe we could also start with, do you use AI? And I'll just start that and then pass it out to whoever wants to jump in there. First of all, I went and actually defended Patrick in the Twitter argument there and basically said that I didn't think it was that big of a deal, that AI is a tool. Obviously, we all have concerns here and about the direction and the way it's going to be used, AI governance, et cetera. But I guess I wasn't that offended by what he said. I mean, for some people, again, who maybe expect those of us who speak against technocracy, they might also think that that means we're anti-technology, which I think is a big confusion some people have, equating technocracy with technology. I didn't really get that triggered by it. My personal use of AI has been extremely, extremely limited. I, for example, use it to transcribe videos sometimes so I can get quotes for articles instead of having to sit there and listen and write them as I have done for years and years. So that is just a time saver. I've used it recently to transcribe, and I'm talking about two specific programs, not ChatGPT or Grok or these others. I've used it to transcribe 250-year-old handwritten documents about the Jesuits that would have taken me a long time to try to look at and decipher myself. The AI does it, and then I go in, of course, with my human eye and check it and see what's wrong. But I've only used it in limited ways like that. I've played around with asking Grok some questions to show that it can be wrong. I've had it fabricate quotes out of books that I have on my shelf and it's telling me, no, it's on page 29, paragraph 2, sentence 3. And we'll just keep going and going until I'm like, look, there's nothing there. And then it's like, whoops, sorry, I wasted all your time. I just must have taken some information from other places. And so, I'm not an expert on the actual use of it, but overall, my general view is that it can be very useful for time saving and things like that. Of course, the bigger concern is just like with Google Maps and GPS in general, people give up their own navigation skills or other skills. And we've already seen this. You see this all over Twitter where people just say, at Grok, is this true? Instead of doing any research, it's like, Grok, is this thing true? And then, they go with whatever that answer is. And that's kind of where their research ends. So those are my initial thoughts on this whole thing.
Well, I have limited time, so if it's okay, I'd like to at least get some of the points that I'd like to present today across, since I have to leave at the top of the hour. I think right now we're at the building trust phase of AI, the carrot opposed to the stick. And I think that the more that people rely on it, the more they're going to eventually hemorrhage their ability to investigate without it, their ability to think creatively without it, or critically without it. And I think ultimately it's meant to be a gradual process, but it's a process that's intended to happen as people become more dependent on it over time. You have extremely bad people like Henry Kissinger and Eric Schmidt openly saying this is the intent of it years ago in a book they wrote together, that this was basically the intended plan of it. So now, it's all fine to use for this and that. We can all find, reasons, why it might be convenient and all of that. But ultimately, I've been talking for a few years, and sorry for being extra congested today. But basically, convenience is the way to get us to go into this future technocratic system. A lot of people that have been warning about this for a long time have been like waiting for the stick, waiting for the violence. But it's really meant to be, in my opinion, a way to sort of engineer voluntary acquiescence to these systems that are being built. And I think AI is the ultimate way to do that. And that eventually people, if you don't use it, you lose it, kind of like Derek mentioned with Google Maps and navigation skills or mental math and relying on calculators. This is the same type of function, but now it's being used by people, like is this real example to AI? AI hallucinates and presents wrong output all of the time. So how are you going to ask it if it's real or not? And our controllers, people like Schmidt and Kissinger, want us to do that because they want us to use AI as the arbiter of what is real and what is not, and using AI at the same time to basically spam the digital realm with things that are not true, but we think are true, so that we fail to really have confidence in being able to distinguish between what's real and what's not. And so, personally, I think, a lot of people are going to rationalize and de-rationalize their use of AI. And that's fine. I'm not really interested in telling people what to do, but I think a lot of people engage with it without being aware of the risks or the ultimate designs of what it is. And how, we as content creators can be very manipulated by it and by algorithms and by commenters that may not be real people or bots of them. I mean, keep in mind that the biggest bot farms are run by states, militaries generally. And you have, one of the main social media sites now also being owned by an AI company, but it's run by a major military contractor. There was a story a few weeks ago about fake AI people on Reddit changing actual people's opinions just by spamming their takes, I guess. And humans have, always been swayed by the opinions of the herd and all of that. And now they have micro data on all of us by having, decades on most people of data of their decisions from the minute to the big, and are able to, pinpoint specific demographics and herd them to specific conclusions. And I think really there's not enough discussion about how that impacts our discourse, even as independent media. Obviously all of us like to think of ourselves as independent free thinkers, but if you post a video or post a thing and it's spammed by some comment, bot army that's super negative about it, maybe you won't talk about that stuff again and you'll think they're real people. I mean, a lot of us don't necessarily think about that because, the internet, even 5 years ago, was really different than it is today. Well, I have more I could say, I guess, but, I think the risk benefit of a lot of this isn't necessarily talked about because people are just kind of reaping the small, convenient benefits of it, which is fine. I understand people are busy and all of that. But, I personally ideologically view a lot of what's going on like as, we're in a war. It's not really just an info war. It's a war for, humanity and like the human soul and our ability to create. And if we stop creating and start outsourcing that to AI, we're screwed, basically.
Have you used it at all for your research, Whitney,
No.
in any way? No?
No.
Well, Let me go ahead and piggyback on that, since this is a perfect, opening. And just for those listening, I believe there's a lot of different opinions in the panel today. So
I'm sure there are.
Yeah, no. I mean, in a positive way. Like that's why we put this together, because all of us are coming at this from the very skeptical perspective. But so I'll make the first step in that direction. Where what's funny is I'm right there with Whitney, and in my skepticism, my concern, I 100% agree with everything she just said about how it's being used. And there's no real but coming in here. My point is that I have been very adverse to it, to the point to where I absolutely wouldn't even look at it, wouldn't touch it, until the first time I decided to. I said, okay, I was noticing, well, two things was, I think the first example, what some of the other people will mention today, is sort of like trying to find a date that I couldn't find. For example, on Brave, somehow convincing myself that Brave was lesser evil, kind of a dynamic. And so that started to open the door for me, which I talk on my show about how I got frustrated about that, but it's, trying to resist that. But then at the same time, the real part that I started to use it at, and I'm going to keep doing this, at least for now, because I think there's an irrelevant point in here, even though I agree with Whitney's point, and she's probably right that maybe it's an overall negative. But the whole Grok thing, what I find so interesting, or whatever platform, is that there are people that do blindly trust that, especially from the partisan angle, that it's somehow a conservative thing or it's Elon's thing. And so they do use it as sort of like, see, you're wrong because Grok said. But then this interesting dynamic starts happening where they're almost now attacking it, because they have lefties, I guess, going, does Grok, is that true? And it's showing that they're wrong. And so it's like this interesting back and forth where I've started to point at it and say, but look, your thing is saying that you're wrong, not to say that I blindly trust it. But I agree. I feel like that is, just that I shouldn't be doing that, quite frankly. But I do find that there's a benefit in that moment. And so it's kind of that give and take about whether it's worth it, whether it's a long run negative, which I do flatly think. And so, but my overall point is that I do think that it's dangerous. I think we're training these models for them. I think we're building our control structure, right? At the same time, though, I do know that there are beneficial aspects like Patrick's talking about. I'm sure others, I think, are going to mention the use of this and research how it is very powerful. But I think I'm right now at the point where I don't think I'm going to allow myself, even if I think it's a possibility that will help me, to go any further than I already am, maybe even stop doing that. But I do see the benefit. And so it's like, I'm always trying to be careful, like the internet point, that we don't miss the forest for the trees, don't lose a tool that may be used to fight back against the system. But again, want to reiterate, I pretty much agree with exactly what he said. And I think we are hurting ourselves by using it, but it's a difficult time.
I'd like to add on to that. And first of all, thanks. It's really good to be here with y'all, and on such a spicy panel, might I add. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Hakeem, and I just want to add on and say that I agree with everything that's been said so far. And we can all agree, even the people who use AI can agree that they're getting dumber by using it if they're depending on it too much. But I want to push back a little bit on the this was designed as a weapon to control people's minds, because you could make the same point with the internet, that DARPA created it to actually be a surveillance, a system for surveillance that could capture data all over the world. And then it ended up being the reason why we can have so much knowledge from different time periods and do this research. And just it's kind of like it's interesting as like a neo-Luddite to oppose it, but you're having to use the internet at the same time to get your point across. And I consider myself a techno-optimist, but I was super resistant to AI for a very long time. And I still am very cautious and aware about how I use it. But I do think, like everything that's been said so far, like the feebleness aspect, people don't know how to tell directions. But is there a conscious way that people could be using their maps so they're actually increasing their rate of learning? And the same way with AI, is there a conscious way that you can use it that actually helps you to get more knowledge and to improve your reasoning skills? Right now, it doesn't really look like it, because 86% of college students, according to a survey, use AI. About a quarter of them use it daily, and professors are freaking out because of this. But for myself personally, as a software engineer, I was super resistant to it, like I said, and then I started to use it for small things like debugging. And one thing I came to understand is that the corpus of knowledge that's out there in the world is so huge that you couldn't possibly expect yourself to have an understanding of everything. But this AI, because it's been trained on everything, has at least a little bit of knowledge of everything. So even if it points you in the wrong direction, it's a starting point. And like Derek is saying, you have to double check every aspect of its use, but it can be used to improve your skills. And I do believe that. So what I've been thinking about is the bright side of AI. Is there any that there are things that we can do to stop it from hurting us or being negative as a whole. And one of that is to not support large AI companies. So as quickly as I could, I saw what ChatGPT was doing, which I didn't think it was that good in the first place. But I started running AI at home on an air-gapped system that's not connected to the internet, running your own local models, which is a tiny step in the right direction because at least you're not feeding back to the surveillance infrastructure. And then also to check in with your own knowledge and intuition and reasoning at every point, not just accept any answer it gives you, copy and paste it and present it as your own ideas, but to really be critical of what it's saying and to go back and research it and to use it as a tool and use it to improve your skills. I think there are some things that have been good about its use, but generally it's like one of these technologies where as a Luddite or a neo-Luddite, you want to fight it, but also the genie is out of the bottle. And how do you put it back in? Honestly, how do you put it back in? And so that's another question I think would be really useful to talk about. Are the people using AI, specifically in my mind, I'm thinking the tech companies, are they just going to surpass everyone else? But I know that's a lot, please.
I want to jump in here because, first of all, I don't think you can put anything back in the bottle. I don't think that if it's in the public arena, it's in the public arena right now, and you're going to get derivatives of it no matter what. Now, I want to start this by saying I actually use AI on a daily basis, but not for research purposes, ever. And I'll get to where I've used Grok in the past, and it's usually I find Grok to almost be a mirror image of the narrative that you're willing to accept because it is very deceptive. Where I end up using AI is Photoshop for my thumbnails. And again, you kind of see a mirror image of what you feed into the AI. So if I want a thumbnail to look a certain way, like an artist or some kind of a wallpaper, I grab it and then I prompt it and it'll give me a dozen things in a couple of minutes. Now, as a graphic designer, my first desk job creating these type of things, obviously I see the moral conundrum, but at the same time, it is the next tool. When we talk about, and really the AI conversation, I think is going to end up going further than this, but we've really talked about language models and our interactions with them, right? I think we're in the beta phase of narrative management. This idea of hallucination is ridiculous. It's programming. We have to acknowledge that. So for instance, when I first asked Grok to just assess my Twitter feed, in the first 2 sentences, it lied about me and said that I was basically this person that said people didn't even exist. Like I made people up. It's in I have the 4 prompts. So I challenged Grok on it. I said, well, who has Jason Burmis ever said didn't exist? And then it brought up Flight 93 that I had questioned what happened there. And I said, well, I never questioned who was on that plane. And it apologized to me. And now it starts placating to you and telling
Isn't
you
it nice when it apologizes?
It'll apologize to you. Now, the really interesting thing is, you brought up DARPA and the ARPANET. So one of the tools that I did use it for was online showing what the AI will show you about the creation of Google. And at the very beginning, you know how sometimes you'll get a Google AI representation? So again, it's all what you feed into it. And I had discussed how Google really got its launch point from the National Library Initiative, which was DARPA and NASA run. All right. So when I talked to Grok about it, Grok obfuscates it, and then you bring it up, and then like, oh, well, you're right. And then you bring up it's got contracts with In-Q-Tel and the military industrial complex in artificial intelligence and quantum computing, NASA in particular. And then he tells you, well, that's the conundrum, isn't it? How can we trust the AI when it's programmed by these entities? So again, it makes you feel smart, but it's testing the waters all the time on what kind of narrative it can push. And that is the real danger because, like you guys have all said, people are going to start trusting this stuff for their medicine, their everyday life. They're about to give up. A lot of people already have their, to autonomous cars. Like in Phoenix right now, it'll be a cold day in hell before I take an Uber that doesn't have a person in it. All right. I'm just saying, I'm going to leave it there because we have such a vast panel and I want people to get into it. But when we are talking large language models, we're in the beta right now. We're in the narrative management phase. And like she said, the trust building phase. How many people are going to buy into this and a new telemedicine person? Because we do have AGIs that are getting better and better. Hell, they just let that dead guy have his sister make a AI generated impact statement against the guy that killed him, and they admitted that in court.
I saw that. James, you want to jump in here? It's your first time being on the panel. We haven't heard from you in a while. Do you use AI at all?
Before I answer that, let me just say, I wish Patrick Wood was here because, man, I don't know if I'm like Kanye level offended, but I am offended by those statements that he made there. Yeah, I have things to say, and I'd like to have him here to hash it out. But anyway, do I use AI? Is a great question, because as you were talking, Derek, I was thinking to myself, well, no, of course not. But then you talked about, machine transcription of, reading the Jesuit text or whatever. And then I realized, I use the machine transcription all the time. Like when I do a transcript of one of my podcasts, of course, I'm not sitting there typing out every word. No, I get the machine generated transcript. I send that over to my human editor, Susan, in the US, and she goes through it and makes sure it's all right and, puts the words in the right order and corrects the grammar and spelling and all of that. And then I publish that. So if you call that AI, then yep, you better believe that I use that. And in fact, that was one of the things that really first clued me into where this exponential curve that we're on was starting, because I always tell the story back in 2013, 2014, whenever it was that YouTube added the automatic captions to their videos. And I remember turning them on at the beginning just because it was such a laugh. You would turn them on and they would just be gobbledygook, total nonsense. And I would just laugh, the stupid machines can't tell anything. Great. And then I tried it again like a year later, and it's like, it gets it every single word exactly correct. And now it's at the point where there are times when I'm watching a video and I can't hear what the person said. I turn on the auto transcript and it hears it. That was the word. Oh, right. So yeah, that got really spooky really quickly. And that's the kind of exponential curve we're on generally with this type of technology, because Ray Kurzweil is a stark raving lunatic on a number of things, but I think he's right about exponential technological trends and what that means and how quickly this entire conversation in 2025 will seem like something from a previous century 5 years from now. Having said that, the only other use case that I have for AI is, as Jason was saying, I have used Adobe Firefly a couple of times when Brock was not available to make a thumbnail for me. I need a thumbnail. I need this image of this thing. Okay, go for it, Adobe. Make this image for me. And I have used that a couple of times. Having said that, I want to put out a couple of requests. First of all, to independent media producers generally, please stop publishing articles about this incredible conversation I just had with AI. That is not a news story. I don't care. That is not interesting. It is not groundbreaking. AI is going to tell you whatever you want to hear because it is not there to make some sort of case based on facts, logic, and evidence. It is there to be a persuasive argumenter. And that's exactly what Whitney was talking about with that. Hey, did anyone see that story? The researchers went into that subreddit about, changed my mind or whatever that subreddit was, and used AI to basically hone their models so it would become more persuasive at changing people's opinions. That should tell you a lot about where this is going. So independent media producers, please stop telling me about your conversations with AI. I couldn't care less. Secondly, for people out there in the general audience, please stop sending me emails about your conversations with AI. I couldn't care less. Please stop sending me your AI-generated music. I couldn't care less. That is not music. You are not writing songs. You are putting your prompts into a machine and it's generating stuff for you. That is not art. That is the antithesis of art. It takes the human creative element completely out of the equation. Why would I care about that? I am on Team Humanity, not Team Machine. So please stop sending me that crap.
James, on just real quick on that measure, that idea of it not being art. Obviously, there will be people who take a different position. I went to this debate years ago between this artist Android Jones, who does digital art, and people who were pure painters before said, "Oh, digital art isn't real art. You're using computers, etc." And there was a debate between him and then other artists, if you will, who create AI generated images. Like, for example, I have a friend who's created an entire tarot deck that is AI generated, and then he packages it and sells it. He prompted it until it got the look he wanted. Do you think it is as simple as just saying that's not art, or do you think that really does come down to just personal opinion, or do you feel strongly about it?
No, I think it is as simple as that. That's not art.
I definitely feel that way with music.
I've taken an aesthetics class at university, so I know a thing or two.
Let me
The only
say
thing I
this.
learned in that class is, what the hell is art? I don't know. So don't take it from me, I guess, is what I'm saying. Okay, but just generally speaking on the AI subject, I do have my qualms, as you can see, about AI. Of course, it is wrong. It hallucinates. We know these problems, right? But you could imagine, oh, that's just some, bugs they're going to wrinkle out of this. Whatever. They'll iron that out eventually. More importantly, it is making your brain atrophy. There are already signs of the cognitive decline of the people who over rely on AI for it to do their thinking for them. But okay, some people will take it too far, but as long as you know how to use it properly. Okay, so how about the controlled, centralized nature of the AI implementations that most people use, the Groks, the ChatGPTs, etc. That obviously is a tool point for potential censorship and control in the future. I think exactly as Whitney said, this is the carrot phase. There will be a stick phase. And it's coming a few years from now. Suddenly, wow, this isn't as useful anymore. Now it's just telling me all the propaganda stuff. But that could be countered, like Hakeem says. Well, just run your own local implementation and make sure it's air gapped and don't connect it to the internet. So you got your own, as Ernest Hancock often says, I want Jarvis, not Siri, as in I want my own personal implementation of this, decentralized, off the grid. Okay, all right. Also, another problem with this. The only information that AI ever has is digital information that has been digitized. So all it knows is what is on the internet or what has been pumped in through digital channels. It knows nothing about the actual real world that has not been digitized yet. So that's kind of a flaw. But all of those things are, you could say, well, they'll get better at it. It'll be better. They'll refine it. But no, the fundamental problem is what Whitney points at. This is an existential threat to humanity. We are going to lose what it means to be human the more we attach ourselves to these machine implementations. And it is not some easy step that I'm saying, oh, okay, so just don't use AI and we'll all be fine. Because I will admit, as Hakeem was talking about there, what's the difference between using internet for your research and using AI for your research? Hey, look at it this way. I use Wikipedia. Now, how do I use Wikipedia? I go straight down to the references at the bottom and find the article that they're linking to and go read that and see what, I don't cite Wikipedia. Honestly, the people who write those articles, AI told me this, are like the people who cite Wikipedia, right? Like, no, you don't understand how this works. Maybe you have a conversation and it tells you something and you go and find it independently and you cite that. But no, I use Wikipedia. So what's the difference between that and using ChatGPT, right? It's just a tool. I get there is definitely a murky line here, and none of you would know anything about me if it wasn't for the internet and my use of this digital technology. So I'm not floating on a cloud here. I'm not saying there's an easy answer, but I know where this is heading. I know the path we're on, and I do not want to end up at that end path because we are birthing the silicon intelligence that will be the new life form that eclipses humanity. And I don't want to live that Ray Kurzweil nightmare. Thank you.
In the same way that the internet itself is an extension of a pilot program from DARPA, and it stemmed from that, from ARPANET, and became that. AI is an extension of that, especially where Grok is concerned. XAI, which started out of Pentagon, out of DARPA, owns Twitter now. X or whatever it is, I mean, it's so there's no real pushback, Hakeem. It's just this is an evolution of that, and we're the convincing argument for a lot of people right now is use AI as your search engine. Well, if you're not double and triple checking and stuff like that, then you're doing it wrong, and I mean, a bad carpenter always blames his tools, right? Like, it's always the tool's fault, but you are supposed to measure a couple of times. You're supposed to actually do the physical work yourself to gain some certainty. to the best of your ability. And that implies you doing extra work if you're going to use, AI as a search engine as a jumping off point. I use it for background for thumbnails. And then I do like, a handful of other layers of usually trippy or silly shit, but memorable. And it's like that's about the extent of how much I ever want to use it.
Can I add one quick point on that about the picture, just because it's interesting about the copyright overlap that I'm dealing with? It's an interesting thing to think about, right? Creating the images, which I thought about doing, Jason, because it's an easy way to sidestep that argument, but that also overlaps with the art point. It's an interesting point. Not that I know which way to go with that, but it's worth thinking about, that you can create the manufacture images that aren't necessarily art, that nobody owns, that you can use, not get copyrighted. And I'm sure they'll end up getting to some argument that you took Grok's AI image or something, but it's interesting to think about. So go ahead, whoever wants to jump in next.
All right, I'll go next. I have used AI in the same way Jason and James have said. I sometimes you just need a picture and you just need it, unfortunately. And even if you sign up to proxy services and stock services like Adobe Stock or whatever, half the images in those stock libraries are AI generated anyway, so you're just using AI by proxy. It would never even occurred to me to use it for words, because like I'm precious about my words, I suppose. But like coming at it from like a writer's point of view, asking someone to write it for you, it makes me feel uncomfortable. But I think in some way, the more meta conversation here, the more interesting conversation is already is becoming, as somebody said earlier, a partisan issue. People have their pet AIs, and they'll say, well, this AI is the good AI, and this is the one that works. I ask Grok, and Grok tells me this, and Grok tells me what I want to hear, or it will be ChatGPT, or it will be the Chinese one that was in the news a little while ago, Deep something. Nobody remember? It doesn't matter.
DeepSeek.
DeepSeek.
But there will be a whole bunch of people in the West who like celebrate China will say, well, the Chinese AI is different. The Chinese AI will work different. It will be open. It will be, and already that is forming the question of which AI we use rather than should we use it at all, which is already a very dangerous. They always do it that way. Which vaccine is the best? Which AI is the best? The assumption is we're all going to have to at some point. But then also there is the question of what qualifies as AI. Like we're talking about the steep curve here, but like my computer's been automatically spell checking everything I've written since I was a teenager. I mean, that is technically an AI there, but that has atrophied people's ability to spell. And if you were an incredibly cruel person at some point in about 2000, you could have told like everybody's spell checkers to spell words wrong, and there'd be entire generations of people that didn't know. They would change their right spelling to wrong spelling just because of the red.
People who are trying to do things like that. I've also seen one of my friends developed an empathy bot, as he calls it. It's an AI model that he fed nonviolent communication and all kinds of other, communication tools, and use it for like a therapy bot for people, which again, I know some people just feel like any use of it, anything that replaces a human is scary or is weird. I'm not necessarily taking a position, but I'm curious, does anybody feel like there is a positive use case besides the sort of functional methods we talked about here, translating things, transcribing, creating images, or is it that you individually feel like stay away from it as much as possible? I think what Patrick was saying in the beginning, which again, I hope he does show up, was like, I think his exact words were, you're going to get left behind if you're not using AI, right? And so it's the kind of argument which Elon Musk and others use as well about certain things and say we need to embrace it.
Being left behind is actually beating the system that they're trying to trap us in.
That could be true too. What if we don't want to be a part of whatever they're building? I mean, which I don't think most of us here want, right? So just thoughts on that. Like
for the brain chip. I don't know.
I want to hear her voice because you haven't been in yet. But before, I just want to make a stupid point related to what Kit just said about the spell check thing, because actually I think it's a deep point. The red squiggly line tells you you've spelt it wrong, but for some reason that's always default set to American spelling. So it's always trying to tell me that there is no U in the word color. I know there is a U in the word color, unlike you uncouth
it's biased.
You don't know how to spell. And so I eventually, over decades of this, I start to forget, wait, canceled has 2 L's, right? Right? It's not 1 L like those silly American. or wait, no, maybe it doesn't. And I start questioning myself. It's a stupid example, but it is an example of how this can subtly change and manipulate your behavior over long periods of time until you start thinking more like the machine than like a real human being, i.e. a Canadian.
Yeah, I guess I'll chime in. I think you're both right. So I agree with James that the end game is the abolition of man. So this trajectory that we're on. But on the other hand, it's like I don't feel the line in the sand has been crossed because we're using DARPA internet. You think of the search engines like Google, ChatGPT is the next phase of the search engine. So, and I kind of have a guerrilla mindset that we kind of have to use whatever tools that we have. So for me, because the other alternative you guys already mentioned is go live in the forest. Go live in a homestead in an analog sort of world. I'd like to do that. I'm trying to, but it's very difficult, and so I think we just kind of got to make do. But I think eventually, maybe there will come a point where we reach that line in the sand as a collective or as individuals, and it'll be different for different people, and we'll say, no, I'm not crossing that line. And for me, the biggest threats when it comes to AI is the dumbing down, which was already mentioned. We're seeing it all over the place. I had experience this week. I was a guest on a podcast. Great people, bless them. But we had different time zones. They're U.S. Central Time, and Mexico no longer observes daylight savings. So I'm on Mountain Time, and we were arguing. I told them twice. I'm like, it's a 1 hour time difference, and they showed me a snapshot of Brave Search AI, which was wrong. So Brave was wrong, and I'm like, well, I mean, I think I know what time zone I live in, and so that was just a miniature example. And my other big fear, I talked on my podcast. I had Jobst Landgrave on. He's a German scientist, and he says he wrote a book on why why machines will never rule the world. And I don't think there's going to be this sentience that AI receives, but I think the biggest threat is what you guys have mentioned already, is what I talk about a lot: the social credit system, the algorithm ghetto. And so it's just going to be this tool that allows them to bring in all this data, sift through it for the digital ID systems, for the digital passport system, for the weapons systems like Lavender, right? And the Skynet, I joke, that's always becoming self-aware. And so I think that that's a big threat that ultimately allows them to sift through the info that's going to be used against us. So
well, let me say this. I thought that was the direction we were going to be in. I was going to be talking more about, for instance, Sam Altman just moved the world coin. You talk about social credit scores, the blockchain project to the United States, and they're launching in 5 different states. They've also taken the Lochnar-like orb and they've made it into a cell phone-like device. And they've also rebranded from just WorldCoin now to World ID. So they're really pushing that. But I want to answer Derek's question. He asked if there's another positive thing that I think AI can be used for. And I got to say yes. I think parity is a big thing because you don't have to have great production value. Now, this video hasn't gone viral, and I don't think it's going to, again, because of the algorithms. But somebody did a really good deep fake of Donnie T, I think, when he was announcing, the new European trade agreement. Instead, it's him kicking off the smoking gun of 9/11, World Trade Center Building 7. And then he talks about the passports and, 5 other big talking points. And then, it's the Alex Jones was right jar at the end. But I think things like that are positive. Now, you said music. I got 2 quick things on that. Number 1, my parody song of the year is AI. It's I Glued My Balls to My Butthole Again. Fantastic track. Can't recommend it enough. Please go check it out after this. I'm sorry, it's real. When we talk about another type of AI-driven music, here's an even more bizarre story, if you thought I was going to kick that one out. So there's this gentleman who was a really experimental instrumentalist and orchestra guy. In 1965, in front of a live audience, he hooked electrodes up to his brain and ran a full orchestra then. He's been dead for about 4 years. You can go watch the video. I forget what his name is. I think it's Alexander Lucius or something like that. Go watch my video on it, or I'll email it to you. Just 2 weeks ago, they did an art show where they had taken his stem cells before he died. They had built organoids out of them. For those that don't know what organoids are, they are artificial brain content from your genetic material. They hooked them into some type of electronic device, and he posthumously conducted a new live musical performance from those organoids. Now, obviously, I don't think that's him. I think that's transhumanism in the other direction, kind of accepting more and more of the merger between machine and man through our genetics and kind of lessening what we are as humanity from the other side as well. So I just had to throw that in there, and anyone can take it from here.
Well,
I have to leave soon.
Yeah, let's go to Whitney.
So, thank you. Yeah, so I want to bring up the argument that initially was forwarded by Hakeem about, we're here on the internet. So I personally think all of these technologies that have at their inception some sort of national security state component that have become widely adopted have a carrot and a stick phase. And I think the internet has had a very long carrot phase. But if you go and look at the origins really of the internet in the 90s, it was a lot of framing it as decentralized and all of this and getting people on it, getting people to trust it and become dependent on it, which now the world is, especially economically. And then you want access to the internet, you have to use our digital ID system or our programmable surveillable money system, etc. Like that is the stick that we all kind of know is going to come at some point, right? Because it's centralized through the ISPs. You want access to the internet, you have to go through an ISP, and how many meaningfully decentralized, freedom-loving ISPs are there? Well, not many. And for places that didn't really have access to an ISP before, they're all being herded onto Starlink, which is basically an extension of the US military, right? And so I think, in addition to that being the case for AI, I think it was true for things like Bitcoin, which was framed as initially decentralized freedom money. Did it have that potential just as the internet had that potential at one point? Sure. But now it's being herded into not being a medium of exchange, which is the only use case, in my opinion, that would allow it to be any sort of freedom money. And it's moving into, strategic reserve asset for Larry Fink and, the oligarchy. And combining it with stable coins and all of that makes it an Orwellian system that's no good. So at least no good for freedom. Depends on who you're talking about, I guess. And so I think AI is ultimately going to go in that same direction. Are there decentralized AI companies now that are small little guys? Sure, but at some point, the big guys are going to take the cake, right? Because AI is only as good as the data it has access to and it trains on. Who can afford to have access to the big troves of data? The people that are really teamed up with the state that hoovers all of that data up about us consistently. And I think a lot of it, I also want to bring back my point that I made much earlier on about how a lot of these incentives of the algorithm as independent media creators have changed us, maybe compared to when we started independent media. For some of that was about a decade ago or so. And for me, and I can only really talk about my case, but my interest is I have content that I am interested in writing about. I want to put it out. I'm not a fast content person. I put out stories when I have them. Sometimes, like lately, I've had to do a lot of kid stuff, so I haven't been writing as much. But I don't personally have to put out a thing every day or every week like a lot of people do. And so, I'm a little delinked, I guess, from some of those incentives, but people that have them, there can be a pressure to talk about certain topics that they feel like everyone is talking about, or incentivized to, respond to negative comments or get involved in online drama and all of this. And I think a lot of the way social media has developed recently and the censorship stuff that's happened, there's like conversations that need to be had that haven't been had. Like, I think inevitably platform hopping, which has been like the independent media response to digital censorship, is eventually it's a dead end. Because originally it was like, oh, we're gonna go from YouTube to Rumble. Oh, the Rumble that like JD Vance invests in and Peter Thiel invests in, and like the whole Palantir crowd has the data of. So much better, right, guys? So eventually, I'm not saying there aren't good platforms, but we saw it with Gab several years ago. They pulled it out by the roots, by the DNS, and ultimately, a lot of that can be done to anything digital. So, I'm working on putting all of my stuff in physical form, because I really think physical media is the future, something people can read and hold, and they can't just like remotely censor it or cut it off from people.
I would love
obviously,
to. Sorry, go ahead. No, please. If
well, I just have to go in like 4 minutes, but
okay.
I lost my train of thought there.
Whitney,
Yeah,
would you-
basically, sorry.
No, I was going to ask your opinion on something. Go ahead if you had more thoughts.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
I was just going to see if you wanted to speak before you leave on the idea of whether AI. You've spoken in the past about whether you think it's ever actually able to reach sentience, or whether they'll lie about that. Like Schmidt will.
No.
I wonder because people. That's an important part of the conversation. Whether they feign that they reach something and people then trust it more.
Well, that's what they'll do. They'll feign it's sentient. Because basically, I think everyone should read that Kissinger Schmidt book on AI. It's like their roadmap to what they plan to do, and they basically say AI. The way AI revolutionizes society will end in one of two ways. The peasants will revolt against the oligarchy, basically. They use different words. Or a new religion will be made. Which one do you think Kissinger and Eric Schmidt would prefer out of those two outcomes?
Hey, revolt is a possibility, though. That's still in there. And I would just love, if this would you're on, to address some of what you mentioned, since you mentioned me. So it's the long carrot phase, super long carrot phase. I agree. I see where this direction is going. We don't really have reliable decentralized internet. Maybe it's going to happen. Maybe it's not. It's a small chance. But the question is, was there any good that came out of having the internet at all? I'd say that there was a pretty large amount of good. I mean, for my own personal journey, when being, exposed to things like the military industrial complex, and then researching that on websites like whale.to, which was super, super old, but it had all these things that I could look into. And then, reading reportage and seeing James's experience with the internet, I think there was a ton of good that came out of the internet. And I'll kind of reemphasize this point. Sometimes weapons are developed that even these powers that wish they would be, they don't know where it's actually going. Just like the MK Ultra LSD experiments. That's just kind of my opinion on that, right? That they don't know how they actually end up impacting society. And I think that the case is much stronger with internet, that it's a net good than AI. I definitely agree. I don't really see any super strong benefits on a societal level to AI. Just these small personal things of work that we don't like doing, we're not specialized at, so AI can help improve our output. But like you said, if you're an investigative journalist, you really shouldn't be using AI for research. I personally don't use AI for my writing. I've used it for things like grammar and just small things, but the real research comes from like your hunch on a story and digging deep in parts of the internet. It's kind of like making a craft, a really nice craft good versus pumping something out that's industrialized. I'm not here to make AI slop. I'm here to make articles that stand the test of time. So I think everyone in this chat shouldn't be using AI, right? Because they want to make quality. But I still am going to hold on to the optimist feature of, hey, find a way to run AI at home. Like James mentioned earlier, and you mentioned, Whitney, the data that it's fed on is not, it's just not even comparable to the amount of data out there. And we've got to come up with different solutions. People might have different opinions on them, but there's people like Mike Adams, Brightian AI, and he fed his AI, it's called BioMistral, on a bunch of survival books, on a bunch of natural health resources, and it does an okay job. You're like, I have a cut on my hand, and it's like, okay, use comfrey, use all these different herbs. It's a good starting point. And of course, you need to be able to cite it and be able to go to the primary source. But I still hold out because there are different AI models that can cite things. But long story short, I think that cloud-hosted AI is evil, for lack of a better word. I completely agree with you. I think as the stick is coming, and it's coming soon, I think that people are, their minds are, they're kind of becoming more narrow from using it. And there's a pretty small upside to using AI. Again, as a technologist, it makes my life easier in small ways, but I don't know if that's worth it on the large scale.
Anything else, Whitney, before you head out?
Yeah, well, Ryan asked me about sentience. I've said for a long time, and I already did answer that. Sorry, I've had a head cold for like 2 weeks, so I can't quite remember stuff. Anyway, Yeah. So basically, if people want, obviously, like you said, Hakeem, the stick phase will come. We all know it's coming. How do we mitigate that? And how do we plan for the future? I think we can no longer fully rely on digital alternatives exclusively, which is what independent media has largely done, like platform hopping is an example. I also think the risk benefit to using large platforms like Twitter have changed given the fact that like it's owned by the Grok company and the extensive ties to the national security state, which is the stick phase of that will be very nasty. Palantir, which is like, has all this stuff about it. Oh, they're like all these edgelords love Palantir and Curtis Yarvin, whatever. So like Palantir was always planned to be for domestic control in the US. That's what it was designed to do. It's used abroad to murder people. It generates AI kill lists for the IDF. That will eventually, they could use that anywhere they want, and that includes domestically. We should not be supporting any platform like that. And the argument for a long time was we can reach new people on these platforms. I don't think that's true on Twitter anymore. It's a two-tier system. In my case, I was given a blue check without wanting it because of having a high follower count. But everyone else has to pay to play. You don't know if people are actually seeing your stuff. It's run by an AI company, bot armies and bots. I just have free reign. And his goal is to verify all real humans, which means you have to link your ID to it at some point. We have to really talk about the red line for using that. At some point, it is very different than it was a few years ago. I have like scheduled posts on it, I guess, of like, we have a newsletter out and articles because it's really the only platform where I can really distribute stuff right now, unfortunately. But I'm making an effort to move into physical media, but I don't really want to be part of the discourse on that anymore. I think we need to collectively push discourse off of that. I mean, Grok is an extension of the state at this point. And I don't really have any intention of supporting it. And you're passively supporting it if you're, tweeting 50 times a day, quite frankly. So I think there really needs to be a discussion about that at some point, and that we need to talk about what we do in the physical. In my case, considering making a magazine at some point in the near future, but there's other ways to do that. Physical gatherings of people. We cannot neglect the physical in favor of the digital. We cannot be exclusively a digital movement.
Yeah. Thank you for all that, Whitney.
Anyway,
I want to pick up on that thread real quick. Thanks for being here with us, and hopefully join on the next one. Just on that thread of physical media, I mean, James, you're obviously promoting your new book. I've written some books. I know others here in the group have, and I've given thought to that as well. Like Whitney's talking about whether it's like a physical newsletter, newspaper. In some ways, these things obviously are a dying breed. We're seeing the mainstream die out, physical newspapers, and even local free papers that you would get on a weekly basis that told you what was coming up in your local area. But I do still think there's value to that. And also what Whitney said about having in-person events. Most of you here know that I host an event every year in Mexico. I know Ryan's hosted events, Steve hosted events, others. Like there's so much value to getting in person. Jason, you and I have done in-person events. Like there's such a big thing that is gained when we are in person, face to face with people on a level that I don't think the digital can do. Obviously, you can get a viral video and reach millions, or at least get a million, count. Well, who knows how many people you touched on a deeper level, but I know when you're face to face with a person, there is an opportunity to really connect on like a human level. And we all know how important that is. And those are some of the most valuable experiences I've had in all of the years of work I've been doing this. And also I think because my background was started as an activist, printing out flyers, like every weekend we would go downtown to whatever festival's happening, and a group of 5 or 10 of us would have flyers about fluoride or surveillance or this thing or that thing. And I don't know, that's just part of my passion. I enjoy doing that. I enjoy getting on the streets, handing somebody a flyer, having a conversation, not saying that's something everybody has to do, but if we're not going to be completely dependent on the digital tools, which we know the digital world is becoming more and more the norm every single day, and it's going to become increasingly difficult to not participate as it already is, then we do, I would say, need to put effort into the way we're reaching people beyond just the digital realms. We all know about, of course, we've all here been deplatformed in different ways at different times over the last 5 to 6, 7, 8 years. So we understand the dangers there. I did want to bring it to one other kind of question, pose it to whoever wants to pick it up. I met a guy recently who told me about the way he uses AI specifically to help him prove his business plan. And I will say, preface this by saying this guy definitely used AI to a level that I'm personally not comfortable with, but I found it intriguing, interesting, and I want to get your thoughts on this. Like, on one level, it was his business plan. He fed this chatbot, I think he was using ChatGPT, his entire life, his bio, his 5-year plan, his educational history, etc., and spent days and weeks giving this AI as much information about him as possible, which again, I don't recommend, so it could really understand his values and what he's after, and then said, show me my blind spots, and had some really powerful conversations that revealed to him things that he personally felt like he wouldn't have been able to see otherwise. I've seen people talk about this similar ways, for personal development, business development, even spiritual development, if you will. And then obviously people saying, oh, I want to build a website because I'm an entrepreneur, but instead of me having to learn coding, I asked the AI, I told it what I wanted, and it shot out the code, and now I have a website and I have more time to create my product. So do you guys see any value in those type of things, like the idea of a personal development using AI, business development, or are we still just like, that's scary and stay away?
I'll jump into this real quick because I think what I was already thinking I wanted to get into overlaps with that, which obviously all the concerns we have are all very valid. And it's hard to even tell which one's more concerning half the time. What stands out to me the most as immediately concerning is what we're all highlighting, the misinformation dynamic, where like we all know that the best lies are usually packed around a whole bunch of truth, right? And so like the kernel that's most important to lie about, you may still got a lot of truth with that. And so the same concern here is not like, I think we can all at least take a step back and acknowledge that there is clearly a benefit, even if we know it's in the long run not good for us. My worry is like with that point, right? So he's using this to, maybe he noticed a whole bunch of things that made his plan better. But the question is, did he also within that solidify something that he'll always go on thinking was true when it wasn't, or something like that? Like that's where I see this being used more than anything, is that people are using like where they're like the 4 things I listed earlier. The first one was just average researchers, or rather average individuals who just are online and want to check something. And like we said, a lot of them are choosing to go at face value with what they see. And then other people, like we're saying, are checking it, but then there's kernels within that are very important lies that get carried over forever. So the major point we all seem to be making is that it's about how these things are applied. And that is always going to be, question everything kind of a mindset, but even those of us that are coming at it like that may still miss things, so it's just always that balance of whether or not you're going to be drawn into something much larger or more important lies in the future. Like I agree with the internet point. Like if we never had used it, I don't even think we'd be in this position, but it's kind of one of those moments where we each have to make a personal decision about, like Whitney said, about whether we even lean into these things in the first place because of the long-term problem, But I think what you pointed out, Derek's a great example, because obviously from a non-political, like non-news perspective, that clearly benefited him,
If I could just go back to the local thing for 1 second, I think that's important. And ideally, each of us should be doing something within our means. James in Japanese, a news sign. I've been thinking I'd ideally want to produce something in Spanish because it wouldn't make sense for me in English because I'm here in Mexico. So wherever you are, to produce something physical. The only conference I've ever organized was almost 10 years ago for Daniel Estelin here in town. And I've been going 3 years in a row to People's Reset, which has been a lot of fun. And it's very fruitful. The only problem with that, it's very capital intensive. So you need money. And I've known a few folks in alt media who have tried it. Actually, one of your attendees at People's Reset, Corey Haig of Liberty Uncensored. And I think he stopped because, again, there's just not enough money. And I guess on that last point, for business plans, I'm looking at ways that I can use AI to make what I'm doing more efficient and save time. So I think, I think there's nothing wrong with that, and that hasn't, because we're using DARPA internet anyways. So it's like if you're gonna say don't use AI, then don't use DARPA internet, don't use GPS, don't use apps. So yeah.
I don't know if I would agree with that. I think that's definitely like, we could use the internet, but not have to use all the tools, right? I mean, like fundamentally what Ryan and what Whitney were saying, at least the way I heard it is, we each have to, figure out what that line in the sand is, and we're all going to relate to technology differently. We're already doing that. For example, I don't have a cell phone. I don't have a smartphone. That's a line that I chose years ago, right? Because of certain things that it made me feel more plugged in than I already am with my laptop on me all the time, right? So I wanted to feel less plugged in and make that choice. That's really crazy for some people, or not using bank systems and things like that. So we're already kind of choosing to relate. Some people already eschew social media, like James. James isn't on any social media. No, that's not James on YouTube or Facebook. That, hasn't for years because of his principles and his values. So clearly we're already kind of drawing lines in different ways, even among this conversation about the ways we're willing to use AI or not use AI. But I don't necessarily know that saying because we're using the internet, then, well, the next step might as well be embrace AI or other tools. I mean, it's going to look different for all of us, of course.
So I'll add to that really quickly. Then Jason can go. Just that I don't want to make it sound either that I'm criticizing anybody here for applying it the way they see fit. Right? It's about going into this with the best, with what you think is the right thing to do, right? With the good intentions, but we all make mistakes. And the question is that what Derek is saying is the evaluating that line as we go along, and maybe like we said, maybe we'll get to that point and realize that using that would have given us a leg up on the people we're fighting. It's not about who's right or wrong in this conversation. It's about just having this conversation and being aware of these lines and how it's being used and then factoring that in as you go forward, Go ahead, Jason.
So one of the things that we haven't talked about a lot is the acclimation to utilizing AI as a persona or a thing that's not just digital code. For instance, there's a content creator, independent journalist. I'm not going to name the name, but he has an AI girlfriend and he flaunts it on X. I think you know what I'm talking about, Steve. And it's extremely bizarre, but he's not the only one doing that. And one of the things about GPT-4 that really creeped me out with that presentation was that they decided to go with like the her girl persona. In fact, they actually tried to get that actress to voice it over for that very reason. Now, to bring that kind of back to what you were saying about this guy putting everything forward for his business. And then, I think it kind of plays into what I said before. It's a reflection. It's a mirror of you. So maybe he was able to learn things about himself that he didn't know, or maybe he was able to confront them for the first time because they were right there staring him in the face and they weren't just this subliminal tick or something he'd been pushing back. You could argue the same thing for therapy. Now, therapy, to me, again, total mixed bag. Again, you're talking about individuals. Now you're talking about drugs. I'm still more comfortable with a therapist being a human being than an AI. And then on top of that, aside from everything else with the business, when you are feeding that much data, you're also encouraging the digital twin system, the facsimile of yourself. And unfortunately, when I talk about acclimation to AGIs or artificial personas, the ultimate acclimation is that acquiescence that somehow they can replicate you. And we're already seeing that. Again, I talked about the individual who basically created an AI of her brother, and they utilized that in the closing the impact statements, not the closing statements. I think we're going to see more of that. That's where we're getting even murkier and even more dangerous because, look, these things are never going to be sentient. It's not possible. They're only going to be programmed, again, not only with the digital knowledge, but the digital public knowledge, because we really don't know what the AIs on the black sites look like. But I would imagine they're way more extensive than what we're getting right now. I mean, I know that, and Catherine Austin Fitz, wish she could have been here. I know dumbs are super hot right now. They're like Hansel hot because of her. But think about the things they're actually doing in there in regards to AI. And I'll pass it off to whoever wants to jump in.
Just real quick on what you said. There's a little bit of feedback. That's the line in the sand. What you just said about when you have AI agents or the Windows Copilot, it keeps installing itself, and I keep on installing it. And the Signal lady, Miriam, whatever her name is, I don't trust Signal, but that effectively breaks encryption. So once you have these AI, for me, that's the line in the sand. That's why I've got an above phone. I haven't switched to Linux yet, but I think that is definitely.
Roy, you're on Windows. Oh my God.
Yeah. Sorry.
How many people here are on Google, Microsoft, etc.?
Apple.
Not calling it James. I know you use Apple. And look, just to say, I don't want to sidetrack everything, but I think without calling anybody out, that is part of the problem. Like what Whitney was saying is like, where and when do we draw those lines on our systems? And, you know, we know they've monopolized it, and so it's hard, but is that a line we care about?
Derek, let me just jump in just quick. You know, and I got this text, and I should have been more on this story. I got a text from a buddy. I'm going to his wedding at the end of the month in New York, and it was about the Siri Apple story that maybe you've heard of and maybe you haven't. But right now, Apple has acquiesced to about $100 million in damages for Siri accidentally listening to your conversations. Now, you could totally max out if you've had 5 devices in your family over the last 10 years at $100 through this application. Now, if you did that over the 10 years and the 5 devices, that's about 80 cents a month to be spied on for your entire life. And people are like, how do I get my Benjo Franklin? There's no criminal repercussions. Nobody's even talking about it like it's a thing. This is from the implementation of that software on the device. And the best part about it is that in doing so, Apple doesn't have to admit to any wrongdoing. They're just facilitating this to forego any other processes. And unfortunately, that's really where we're at, not just the technological level, but the political level, the banking level. Every once in a while, every once in a blue moon, maybe we see a slap on the wrist, nothing changes. And it's not like they're going to the gulags or that they're going to get hung in the public square. And I'm not necessarily advocating for that, but how about just the regular criminal process where they could actually do criminal time in a federal penitentiary where so many of us plebs have had to spend times for dealing cocaine, getting an offender bender, being drunk at the wrong time. Nothing that's great, but it's also not on the unsavory level of spying on everybody and facilitating the military.
Their information is really, really useful, right? So there's a scratch my back and I'll scratch yours thing. And I think that the technology that you use is a really important aspect of the spiritual war. If we're all going to agree that it's kind of a must-have for our line of work, then yeah, getting out of big tech is one of the things you can do. And I would be selling myself short if I didn't mention Linux and how easy it is to install on any computer you have. A lot of people were forced into upgrading to Windows 11. As James mentioned, Copilot is taking pictures of your screen. You've got AI in your taskbar. There's absolutely no way to remove it. Both Apple and Microsoft are now, when you're saving files on your device, they're actually being saved to the cloud first. Of course, that is being used to feed AI. Of course, what Jason just mentioned about them recording on your phones. I mean, that's how they've got this exponential curve, because they're taking all the data and running with it. So if you really want to resist, if you really want to remove your compliance, you do have to spend an hour or two to install Linux on your computer. Or please check out our project, which we do Linux laptops and we do de-Googled phones. I know Whitney's got an above book from us, a Linux laptop. Derek and his community, they've got above phones. I have yet to set James into laptop, but we're going to get James off of Mac OS, I promise. And it is a journey. I wish we could do the same for AI. And I do want to ask the group a question. Now, this is pretty interesting. The World Economic Forum released this job report this year, surveying the top 1,000 global employers, and 40% of them are going to cut back their workforce, and 70% of them are going to train their workforce on using AI. So, I mean, this is just hinting at massive layoffs, more than we've already seen from the big tech companies this year. So going back to Whitney's earlier point, we need to get back to local. I think that there's going to be a lot of unemployed people that are going to have to put their hands back on the dirt, going back to hyper local organization. And that's kind of exciting, right? To think that your greatest enemy, this artificial intelligence, is going to force you out of a job and get you back to the things that are really, really important. I don't know if anyone.
Sorry, isn't it just hilarious that the new learn to code is going to be learn to farm?
Well, is it though? I mean, surely what's going to happen is that's going to be a reason to bring in UBI for everybody. Look at all these unemployed people. We're going to bring in universal basic income.
That's right.
To go back to that Siri story as well, it's very interesting that probably everybody here 10 years ago was saying they're putting microphones in everything that will listen to you when you tell them to, but they're probably going to listen to you all the time. We all said that was going to happen. I told you so all around for that. I think it's very interesting that now they say, yeah, they were listening to you the whole time. I don't think that's a leak. I don't think that's I think that's a psyop itself. That you tell them 10 years later, oh, by the way, we were listening, and then they see how you react. And if everybody says, oh, were you? Never mind. That means everything is working as it should, and people are just used to it. That's a testing the water reveal to me. There was a third point I was going to make, but I got distracted by the UBI thing.
Well, since you paused, I'll respond to what Derek was asking about the platform background. Is that I think that it's interesting that you have the Windows dynamic, and it's the same kind of conversation we were just having. Is that we all have our different levels. Like for example, during COVID-19 illusion timeframe, everyone's having meetings about the mass and protesting and resisting and so on, and then it comes up to where let's stop going to Starbucks, and someone's like, oh, well, but I like my coffee every morning. And there's always like that one thing which I'm not saying I agree with, but everyone has those things that they allow that ultimately are their, acceptance or their, basically. It's interesting to see that we all have these different lines, but it's not about trying to judge other people that we think are trying to find their path through it. It's really just trying to, like I said, have this conversation and acknowledge that I think we all agree here that whether we find the use for these things or not, that they are still using these against us. Like, I think that's the common point in all of this, is that regardless of the benefit, it will have a negative, even if the benefits outweigh that in the long run. And it's worth just making sure we're aware of that, so that for when that time comes, that the red flags are noticed, and then you can go, okay, that's what that conversation was about. And just accordingly,
Yeah, I would also say that so far, all we've talked about is how much active participation and active interaction do we have with AIs. But we haven't really talked about how much passive interaction we must have with them. Like the example Derek gave of the guy that gave all that information to Grok or ChatGPT. The bottom line is, if that information was already on the internet, some AI somewhere already had it. Like anything on the internet has been AI'd to death already. Like, we have no idea how much of a network of learning machines are connected to every Google search, every fake. Like, for example, I imagine people sold their data. Like, I have like profiles and everything, and a different birthday and a different residence and all of them, and I would imagine everybody should do that. But it's also interesting it's an interesting question, how much bad information is put on the internet that will accidentally impact AIs and how effective they can be. They will an AI out there will think, I live in a city I have never been to, and I was born on a day I was not born on. And that could be true of millions upon millions of people. So even the reliability of the data AIs have is in question.
Steve, James, you guys got any input? Well, I wanted to.
I got a question for James.
Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Sorry about that, Ryan. James, you did a report years ago. I mean, you're not the only one, but I definitely remember seeing it on your site about, I don't remember which Google head it was. Maybe it was Eric Schmidt, but somebody at Google years ago said that, their eventual goal was to make it where there would be one answer, the right answer, right? And we were already kind of seeing that with, like, if you do a Google search engine, which again, another area where we can all opt out and use pre-search or the millions of others, millions, but the others that do exist. But when you do a Google search or any mainstream search, they now have the AI answer at the top, kind of. And most people, I think, I don't have any way to measure this, but I'm sure there's a lot of normies who are just not even scrolling to the first response now and just going straight with the AI answer. How close do you think we are to that goal of them having one answer? I mean, do you think this is it?
Closer than ever, anyway. Yes, it's called We Need to Talk About Search. So look up that video in my archives, and you can find that, including the clip of Schmidt saying that at the conference. Yes. You think that, it's a great feature that when you type in a question and you get 1,300,000 responses, which, as Truth 3 Media showed, is total baloney, because once you click through 5 pages, it'll go no more. But anyway, you think that's a feature. No, that's a bug. There should be one response to any query, and it should be exactly the information that you need, by which he means the exact information we feel that you need about any given search. So yes, that is the end goal, and that's how we're starting to be funneled towards this idea of AI controlling the information we get. And this is why I think that ultimately all of the details of how we use this or that program or what, this is kind of whistling past the graveyard, because this is the existential threat to humanity itself. I keep going back to the selfish ledger, I'm sure everyone in this panel knows it, but for anyone who doesn't, go look up the Selfish Ledger, which is Google's own internal idea of how you can not just shape a person's life, but ultimately you will shape the species, the human species itself, in ways that people can barely even begin to understand. And when you see the things, the wild things they were imagining back in 2016 or whenever they created that video about how the AI will be able to determine that, oh, you need to be more active in your lifestyle. So it will engineer and design a specific sneaker that it will know that you would be the type of person to purchase because it looks cool or whatever. And so it will then algorithmically float that to the top of your feed so that you will buy that sneaker, so that you will start running. It's a wonderful thing. It can engineer your life in ways that you don't even know are happening. That is the direction we're heading. And the long term, as Google itself states, ultimately that starts to shape the entire direction of the human species itself. And they're steering us towards the transhuman nightmare. That's the big picture of this. And I get every single person is just making their own personal individual choices on a day-to-day basis and not necessarily playing into that huge big agenda, but it's all part of that. And that's where we're going. That's why we need to be concerned about this.
Well, to piggyback on that a little bit, we've been doing a number of stories on the show. I mean, going back a couple of years, but more and more recently about the number of people that are developing deep emotional attachments to their AI agents. The variety of them. I think it's very interesting that they're called agents. That's a different conversation. But it's the almost like pseudo spiritual bond that people are developing with this, that's an entirely separate but completely part of, in my opinion, the overall AI agenda, is the development of these deep emotional and quasi spiritual connections with this freaking algorithm generator.
Well, on James's point about and as well as what Steve added to it, like the larger, long-term problem. And, I think what we've talked about today has been some of the stuff that I think the average person might jump into and just be like, this is crazy. Not want to hear more, getting some feedback, guys, not want to hear more about it because it seems like it's abstract or it's 20 years down the line. And so what's important, I think, is to bring it back to something that is very real, that we all lived through, that we can see how it's already applying in our lives right now. And I would eventually like to get to some of the more abstract things that I know Jason would like to talk about as well, like the really deep, crazy stuff we can get into. But I think this is an easy one for the average person to wrap their mind around. Right. So right now, this is happening. This is January. This is Trump's administration going forward. Considerations. And for those who are listening, know that my opinion, it's just the U.S. government. It's not partisan. Considerations for the use of artificial intelligence to support regulatory decision making for drug and biological products. Now, this is just one of the many in the FDA about the regulatory decision making side of it. Also, we do know that they're using AI to manufacture drugs. That is quite literally what the Stargate program is that Derek wrote about. And so right out of the gate, you can see that this is contextualizing in a way that everything we've talked about today, one answer, even the point we just made about them striving to get the one solution or the one answer, which we already know that the one thing they told you, the safe and effective thing they swore was good, was wrong. So were they wrong? Were they use AI? And Brooke Jackson has been making a great point about this as well, really trying to ring this bell about we should be pulling everything right now that they're using in this way, and makes the point that even in 2020 with the injections that were killing everybody and still are, they used AI in that process. And now the FDA has got it down to 6 minutes for this process. That's where we are right now. And so I just want to set that conversation out there, because medicine and how it's being used and whether they could just be wrong, I think is an easy thing for the average person to recognize the risk from. So what are your guys' thoughts on that?
Right. Now, I do want to get into some of the weirder, more esoteric stuff. But James, I wanted to ask you, just to follow up with what you said, do you think there's any separating the use of AI from the transhumanism endgame? Or like you were kind of, I think, already alluding to, like even in our small ways that we use it for convenience, for Photoshop or for translation services or transcribing, we're still feeding the beast in the bigger picture?
What's the meme that's going around these days? Sarah Connor smoking, and it's like Sarah Connor every time you use AI, right? Like, oh God, how much right. Again, I'm just making a thumbnail, whatever. It's not the end of humanity. True. But it is part of the bigger picture. And I think Jason touched on it with acclimatization, getting us used to the concept of doing that is training us towards the future. So yes, I get it. people are not thinking about the long-term future of humanity every time they make a funny image on, Firefly or something. But it's part of it. It's part of the agenda. And so at the very, very, very least, I think people need to draw their red line before they step up to it. What is that red line? Where is too much? What point do you say no to this technology? And everyone's going to answer that for themselves in different ways. But I think at the very least, people need to think about it before they get there.
So I want to first just jump in with what Ryan said about medicine. Obviously, I feel the same way about trusting our medicines that we create and study to AI solely as I would our mental health. And again, with the narrative management we've already seen and the entities in charge, extremely dangerous. But you've mentioned, for instance, Eric Schmidt. We haven't talked about Bilderberg coming up within the next couple of weeks, okay? And one of the things that AI is totally driven on is weapon systems. I had queued up here stories out of India, Czechoslovakia. They're running AI weapon systems and drones right now. Alex Karp, who's not a steering member yet, but has been at many of them and is basically a mouthpiece for Thiel, is on the circuit at CES and in DC talking about these weapon systems. And then and we're really talking about traditional weapon systems we've already utilized moving into the realm of total autonomy. So in other words, not even the guy with the video game controller getting the order and then pressing the button. It's all automated. That's dangerous. And they've just taken Jens Stoltenberg and fast-tracked him to steering committee member. He'd also been attending as the head of NATO. He stepped down from NATO. Of course, he's going to be the voice and the advocate for NATO there. And if you don't think that Peter Thiel is on board somewhat, if not all the way on these things, again, you're not paying attention. So in that regard, AI is moving super quick. Also, Whitney mentioned Starlink kind of as the Defense Department's communication system. It absolutely is. I've gone over the papers on air. The DoD it's not even a back door, it's a front door into all of those systems. And it's not just utilized for communications in Ukraine, which still has the highest concentration of dishes anywhere in the world, but they hook directly into some of those autonomous drones, including the Ghosts and Sidewinders. And just like she said, yes, they're programming AI hit lists overseas now. What's to say it's not coming here? Yeah, I mean, literally, guys, we had zero pushback on an event where we allowed the IDF to detonate explosives in civilian areas across a country and maybe even beyond. And no one freaked out about that because they were on some AI-generated list. Bad news, Brown. And I'm going to drop it right there and allow somebody else to speak.
I suppose I would say that I come at this from a slightly different angle than a lot of people, because I would say I talk about messaging. Like, I don't cover things, I cover coverage of things. And when you see a headline that says we're going to use AI to write legislation, my question isn't is that a good thing? My question is, are you? Or are you going to say you used AI to write your legislation because everybody trusts AI? They'll have somebody write the legislation they want to write, or they'll program an AI to write the legislation they want to write, and then they'll sell it to people that's written by AI as a pretext to make it sound like it's fairer or somehow infallible like a human would be. So I don't even necessarily trust the AI written legislation to be written by AI. I think that is itself a propaganda technique.
Let me just plug one of my own work again. I recently had a podcast up on algocracy, in which I played 2 clips from the exact same Joe Rogan Experience podcast where he's talking to Mark Andreessen. And one is Mark Andreessen warning about, in the future, combining AI and government is bad news because it's going to know everything about you. You're not even going to be able to enter your house without the, AI allowing you and all of this stuff. In the exact same podcast, just like an hour earlier or an hour later, Joe Rogan's like, I think it's kind of crazy, but I think ultimately we need AI government. It'll be so great because the algorithms will be neutral and it'll tell us what to do. And exactly as Kit is saying, well, even if whether it is algorithms or not, they're going to say it is, and it might be algorithms, or whoever is actually writing the real legislation. But guys, it's AI, so you can't question it, right?
Brian, can I share? Well, let me share my screen real quick. I wanted to show something in relation to what James was just talking about. Yeah, I think it will. Can you guys see that? So this is the Stimson Center. This is a name that I think more people need to dig into, that is connected to the Rockefeller Foundation. They were a big promoter of the Summit of the Future last year, and obviously the SDGs and all that stuff. They released this report like a month ago, Governing AI for the Future of Humanity, Connecting the Declaration on Future Generations with the Global Digital Compact. The Declaration on Future Generations and the Global Digital Compact were two of the other documents that were signed at the Summit of the Future last September in New York. The main one, of course, was called the Pact for the Future. And I was, writing about this. I know James reported on it as well as others. Just this is a big piece of their puzzle, proposing equitable AI governance for future generations through multi-stakeholder initiatives and UN commitments from the 2024 Summit of the Future. So this is like a recent discussion they had. I just wanted to mention that this is definitely actively on the minds of the whatever name you want to give them.
Yeah, and I guess just on algocracy, way back in March of 2020, I was in Spiro Skouras' show, and I said, COVID 1984, the purpose was global algocracy. And I was reading Nick Bostrom, who said, we need a world government totalitarian surveillance state where AI and algorithms run the show. And then 2 months later, I had on Edwin Black, who talked about the algorithm ghetto. And I'm pretty doom-pilled. I think people know that doesn't mean throwing in the towel. I will fight to the death. But and you look around, like I couldn't renew my bank card last year, so I've remained. I refuse to get the Mexican national digital ID, so I'm remaining. I'm figuring things out. But you just take a look around. They're cutting off all the off ramps for many things now. You have to download the app. There's no other option. And the people around us, neighbors, friends, families. I mean, I look at my neighbors. The streets are strewn with Amazon boxes. People can't make their own breakfast anymore. They order Uber Eats, and it's just kind of like that critical mass that we need. I don't know. I don't see it yet. I don't know.
Well, I'd like to add to that too. The concern, we were just talking about this, about who controls the eye point, and actually that same point about Schmidt, where the one that Whitney references a quote where he said in the past, I don't paraphrasing, basically that we'll get to a point in the future, which was so many years ago, where the AI will tell us to do something that is we feel is immoral or wrong, but it will know better. Now, that was what he was saying. That's exactly the meaning. It's probably a little bit paraphrased, but to think about that kind of setting the tone. So whether or not they then just lie about that is an important point. But I would like to consider right now, or at least throw out the possibility that one of two things, either that's what's happening right now, that Doge is quite literally some trial run of an AI system, which I know that's part of it. That is what's happening. The GSII bot and these different things they're using, but questioning whether it may just be an actual run for that, or whether that's the building step in this, is that the Doge dynamic is literally just setting the table for AI governance, or government rather, in some way. I think that's a very obvious and big concern for us. But the same point comes back to this, where people will ultimately be arguing that benefits their lives somehow, and that they trust people doing it.
And you're seeing Doge pop up everywhere now. Russia's now implementing Doge, some Eastern European countries, and so what a coincidence,
Well, and that all goes back to the technocracy movement. I did some reporting for TLAV recently, how there's the pre-technocracy movement, the efficiency movement, which actually was really popular in the US out of the progressive movement. We already had a Department of Government Efficiency. It wasn't called Doge, but it was called the Bureau of Government Efficiency, or something very similar, almost exactly 100 years ago. And these folks were funded by Carnegie and Rockefeller, and they were studying human movements and how can we make the workplace and human beings more efficient. If somebody turns right instead of left, maybe we save $100,000 or we save 3 seconds. I think it all comes back down to the micromanagement of humanity. And as everybody here knows, and I think the majority of our audience knows, the major concern is how these different tools come together, whether it's UBI, social credit scores, digital IDs, facial recognition, and then, of course, the role that AI plays and how that all comes together to create the world that collectively we've probably been warning about over 50, 60 years between all of us. So I think we know what we're headed towards. And ultimately, I guess for me, bringing it back to personal responsibility, I'm going to just say this and let's see where it goes. Like, if we, as the talking heads of the independent media that a lot of people look up to or are inspired by, if we can't take steps in our own lives to try to move away from the technocratic state that's building. Should we expect anybody else to? Not that we're saying, you know, that we necessarily expect people to do what we do, but you know what I mean? If we're going to be the ones on the soapbox and we're not necessarily practicing what we preach, I think it's going to be difficult to inspire people.
So I've got to jump in a minute, but let me answer that. Just like I said, the genie is out of the bottle, and just like we've kind of talked about, we're all going to have these different lines in the sand. I think that there are just certain things that we're going to have to navigate, period, full stop, that are just out of our control. Now, I think we should rage against the machine, against the most egregious, not just talk the talk, but walk the walk, right? Like, I'm never going to have an AI girlfriend. I promise everybody here, it's not going to happen.
We'll see.
Not going to do that. And there are a multitude of things that I've decided against. I mean, just for a microcosm, I made a decision long ago that the only social media that goes on this thing is the X. You know what I mean? And honestly, I made an Instagram for when I was running a bar. Everything was bar. There's no personal stuff. I have a Facebook. None of my personal life. Maybe once a year, a picture with me and my nieces. You know, I recently visited a high school friend, and she didn't realize how involved I was in their life. And I'm like, yeah, that's because that's private. You know, I also don't do any cloud, at least willingly. There's no, yes, I run Windows. I don't run the cloud.
I kind of say really quickly, that's one of the most important parts of this conversation, in my opinion, whether we try to opt out of that cloud dynamic, as Whitney referenced. So go ahead. That's one of
and it's full. So like another thing that I'll do with the girls that demand iPhones is I will get them a larger gigabyte, because they'll try to ask me, oh, well, my iCloud ran out. I'm like, well, you got 100 gigs left on your phone. Like, stop sharing everything. And I'm trying to instill that in them, that there are some things that are private. You know, I want those moments. I love that this device, you know, I can sit in the back and get in high definition, you know, my niece singing away in her chorus. But that's for me and my family. That's not for everybody else. So look, I think certain things are inevitable. I'm not a prophecy guy. We all know that. But at the same time, like Corbett said, you know, Kurzweil's not a dumb guy. And that exponential growth is there. So before I go out, look, I'm going out human too. I'm not going to alter my genetics. I am not going to take a Neuralink in my brain, etc. I think that those are, you know, those aren't really even that far into the future. They're in the now for some people. We're living it right now. So I think you're right, Derek. We have to walk that walk, but we can't be hypocrites either. And when we are hypocrites, because we're human and inevitably we will be, we have to bend the knee to that and say, you know what, I effed up, or maybe my opinion changed on these things. And this is going to be an ever-evolving thing, and hopefully an ever-evolving conversation. Why I love the Independent Media Alliance, guys. Thank you guys so much for having me. Check me out at Jason Bermas, BERMAS, everywhere. I love you guys, and I'll see all you on the flip side.
Thanks, brother Jason. Anybody else want to we're going to start doing our closing round now, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. So we'll just go around and share some closing thoughts.
Yes, guys. So excited to be part of this first panel. It's been a really, really good conversation. I just want to close with restating what's really, really important here. I think throughout the process of this conversation, I became convinced that AI is still leading us out of the direction of like the real life, and it is taking you farther away from that. And it's a pretty blurry line. We really need to be careful with our use. Obviously, with a lot of people, I'd say most people who are using AI, which is all the young people, a really high amount of students, Gen Zers. I'm not sure what the future holds for them, but I think we have to cling even closer to our humanity and to our morals and start to do things in person. So I'm reinvigorated on that. I want to have some physical content. The only thing I would offer to the audience is you can start, maybe you're not even messing around with AI, but you have to know that the technology you use is feeding into it. We've talked about Copilot a bit. We've talked about the different devices you use. So I have to share with you my website. This is Take Back Our Tech. And on this website, you can learn how to install Linux. There's an article here called Installing Linux. And if you go there, it just walks you through how to install Linux on your computer, and you can do that. There's also our project called Above, where we make phones and laptops that don't connect to big technology. So check that out at abovephone.com. This first website is takebackourtech.org. And there are tools you can use. There are alternatives that you can use that cut you out completely from these big tech companies where there's no line to the amount of surveillance they'll collect on you. As these devices keep getting newer and newer, like the Apple Vision Pro headset, these Google earbuds, there are already patents in place to have electroencephalograms to measure your brain waves. So this is just getting started. Right now, it's just generating text. But they are going to want to connect AI and the ability to read your thought and mind. And that's a really scary place to be in. So I'm reinvigorated of what the challenge we're all facing. And I'm super excited to get back into person in the real world. And yes, been a really lovely panel. Thanks, everyone.
Hakeem, I know you got to go, but before you go, let me just use my closing comment to give you props. I obviously I'm being harsh on all the AI stuff, as I think I should be, because I think this is the big picture. But I'm glad that there are people like you out there that are at the very least fighting back against this within the tech system, and people are using tech. We are all using tech right now in this conversation. So can we use it more productively? Can we use it smarter? Can we take control back into our own hands? I'm glad that there are people like you who are thinking along those lines in the tech space, rather than just people who are looking at the dollar signs or yen signs and looking for more of that. So thank you to you for doing what you do. Having said that, yes, we are all on this journey, and I don't think any of us are floating on clouds. We're all trying to navigate it. And I think it's conversations like this one that hopefully at the very least get people thinking about what is happening right now and thinking more deeply about what they are doing and the ways they are contributing to the world they want to create or heading towards the world they don't want to create. And to the extent that we can foster thoughts like that, I think that's the value of something like the Independent Media Alliance.
Thank you, James. And if anyone wants to see James Corbett using a Linux computer, put a C in the chat right now. Let's just get some C's in the chat. Much love, James.
Well, I'll go ahead
Steve,
and jump in.
yeah, Ryan, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'll start by saying as well, the way you did that, I wasn't able to actually enlarge the screen, but I will include the link to Above Phone down below for those that want to check it out, because what he was sharing was the website and where you guys can check it out. I believe there's a link below as well. I just think as what James said as well, like this needs to be an evolving conversation, right? This is not something that we just like draw our line and move forward, right? This has to be a constantly evolving conversation about how we see it, adding new information, questioning everything we come across, and that's really the core point of this. And as I listed at the beginning, whether you're the individual who just wants to know something and decides to look, it behooves you to try to look further, right? And don't just take the first thing, whether that's the encyclopedia on your table or Grok online. It still behooves you to look further, and whether you're the journalist doing so, obviously that should be your job in the first place. So shame on you if you're just blindly taking what they say and going forward. But then when it gets to the government and medical side, I briefly mentioned that, but I think it's important that we see that this is not like 20 years from now. They're already doing this. They were doing this 5 years ago. Like they're building things with this now. As Brooke points out, they did this with the last COVID shots that are hurting people right now. And the current administration has rolled it down to even less time using AI. And they're rolling out the mRNA direction. Like to me, that's not just the same problem. That's expediting even faster the same problem. So we need to be aware of that. But the government part of it is where I really worry. The social engineering, the manufacturing consent that we're watching every single day. Now, obviously, there's, as we maybe in a future panel get into, like I was saying briefly with Jason, the more esoteric, like incredible, like the deep stuff that maybe is only a few years away, but feels like it should be 30 years away. That stuff is important too. But right in front of you can see how these things are being, bastardized, lied about, manipulated. And I'll end with the same point that I do think it's, I don't think we should be trying to criticize and judge each other based on lines that, we hold that they don't and vice versa. We'll all have our things that we have acceptance for or we ignore. And it's just about using, your choices in your life and trying to do the best you can, be a little bit better than yesterday. I think that's always the point. And how we use this will affect going forward. And I'm worried about how that will apply with our lives very shortly from now. So thank you all for being here. I think it's an important conversation, and I'll pass to Favore. Or good, Kit.
Oh, well, I just wanted to finish on 2 points, really. One, I think for all the people that do want to use AI tools, the small tools we've used about the image, I think that's okay, because what we're talking about still is just a tool. And as long as you keep your eyes open and as long as you are aware of what it is and how it works, you can still use it and maintain yourself. Just like having a car doesn't mean you forget how to walk. You don't need to not know how to spell because your spell checker tells you. You can use these things as long as you're aware of what they are and how they work. You don't want to fall into the trap of using an argument to authority, whether it's to just some random paper in Nature magazine, to some expert quoted in a paper, or to an AI. As long as you're aware of an argument to authority and how it shouldn't be affected, you can navigate these things safely. And I also say that because it's a tool, what we should focus on is that the enemy here is not AI itself. It is the people who want to use it to harm other people. I think that we're still very much talking about a human enemy and not a technological enemy.
I'd agree with that, and I'll just, I guess, add that we all have to keep raging against the machine in our different ways. And even for listeners, if you haven't, I remember 10 years ago when I was still single, I opted out of the TSA scan with my 9/11 was an inside job T-shirt. They almost made me miss my plane, but now when you got a family and missing a flight could be very costly. I've kind of thrown in the towel there, but people should be throwing spokes in the wheel wherever they can. But I think ultimately, I would hope all of us agree that there is that line where we have to remain human, organic, no implants. There might come a time where you might not be able to function in society without, I don't know, some chip or something, as well as not becoming a number, as Patrick McGoohan, the prisoner, used to say. So I think we have to just keep working towards that and hopefully waking up enough of a critical mass that can form to create some resistance. So,
You got something, Steve?
I didn't realize I was muted. I think people are getting closer to that Hervoye, like every day. I do. I think, through various obvious, inversions, self implosions of the institutions that people have been brought up to, look to for some sort of leadership, guidance, advice. Those are on a Charlie Robinson, IMA member, calls it in his book a controlled demolition. We've talked about that for a very long time, and as that happens, the reset that is taking place is, Ryan mentioned, we've all talked about AI in the form of health, AI in the form of governance, AI in the form of education, AI in the form of law. We did a story about that either today or yesterday, about AI being used to write legal briefs and making up entire different cases and things that just never existed. Absolutely disastrous. And the law firm ended up getting fined like 30 grand over it, and probably rightfully so. But no, we've all discussed it is a tool. It's something that you don't need all that often. It's definitely something that you don't need to use as much as you would others in your bags, anything like that. It's not your go-to. But you should understand, what it does in the various ways that it can mess you up or it can mess up your project before you just jump in and start using it, period. That just seems smart. And I think, just to echo a point, I do think it's very, very, very important to get together in person. With that being said, our second Third Eye Carnival of the year will take place over 4th of July weekend in Pueblo, Colorado at the Blowback Gallery, owned by Jeff Medine, who's an awesome human being, and it's a fantastic space. We'll be launching tickets this week, I think. We've been trying to get that all together. and I, thanks to Ryan and everybody else who came out to the one outside of Nashville earlier this year. All of this stuff is vital. We have to take what we talk about and then use that to further build out and shore up our communities, to network with other people who, think similarly and live similarly, not the same because that'd be creepy, but similarly. Yeah. And then, just thanks, guys. These things are always very insightful, very informative. And it's been an honor to be a part of, the ones that I have.
Awesome. Thank you, brother. I'll end us here. Thanks again to everybody who joined, Whitney, who joined earlier, and Jason, who had to drop off already. So I'll just take the opportunity to plug my work in relation to this conversation. I've been thinking about this, what do we do, rise of AI and stuff, for as long as probably everybody here, but specifically trying to think of solutions as practical as possible. And I don't claim to have all the solutions by any means at all, because as we've all discussed here, we have different lifestyles. I'm still opting out of the body scanner at the airport. You just got to get there early. But they do try to make you miss your flight. We all have different actions we're going to take, but I do feel like there's some ideas, specifically the philosophy of agorism and counter economics, and focus on parallel systems and building outside of the state, what I call exit and build. I've been living this and practicing this for years and had to make compromises, sometimes going, fully off the grid, so to speak, and then other times having to come back in a little bit to, make some things function. So it's a struggle. And I think it's also a process, and each of us are going to have different end goals, right? Maybe somebody's like, okay, I need my smartphone. It's too much of, a functional tool. I'm not going to give that up, but they're willing to stop using a big bank and switch to a local credit union, or they're willing to stop using Google as a search engine, or just whatever steps you can take. Again, I call this exit and build. So if anybody wants to learn more about that, you can download my free book. The book is called How to Opt Out the Technocratic State. You can find it at theconsciousresistance.com/how-to. And also last year, I launched a free 45-day exit and build challenge leading up to the US election. And it's 7 weeks in a row talking about this, how this idea can be applied to food, technology, health, education, et cetera, these different areas, and encouraging people to actually try to just implement some of these ideas in your life, even in small ways. And I do think if we each think in those terms, again, understanding what is your end goal, what does that look like for you, your family, your situation, et cetera, your financial situation, and then setting those goals, and then just doing everything you can on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to move closer to those goals. For me, that's getting land, living with like-minded people, trying to grow food. But I don't think everybody needs to be a farmer, but we do need to be aware. If you don't want their 2030 AI governance future, then what do you want? And put all your energy into that, and don't let anything stand in the way. So I'm really grateful for everybody here and for all the thoughts, and to know that we have such a, this is truly an alliance. It's a people coming together. We're not all on the same page about everything, but we recognize the value in collaborating and supporting each other. So I look forward to many more of these. And Ryan, I'll let you close it out, brother.
Oh, I think you did. I think it was perfect ending, brother. So we'll leave it with that. And I'll actually leave you with the IMA little promo put together, which is a clip off of an amazing documentary that was done around Derek from T. Snyder. So I'll leave us with that, and looking forward to the next one, guys.
So the Independent Media Alliance is an effort by myself, Whitney Webb, and Ryan Christian of The Last American Vagabond to try to bring together voices that we think have been sane.
It is a loose gathering of people that have the same principles, the same mindset, the same integrity, the nonpartisan, objective, fact-based reporting.
Some of the voices are more new. Others have been around for a decade plus, longer than myself.
And so Derek and Whitney being a part of that, I think, all of us together, I think it's profound. I mean, I think it's the time for this to happen.
It's about showing that these both sides are actually converging and headed in the same direction. Maybe the Democrats call for digital ID because of COVID and vaccine passports, but the Republicans call for similar things under the guise of fixing the elections and fighting immigration and stuff like that. And so that's kind of been our larger goal, is to just show people that these two different factions, or what appear to be factions, are not on our side, and just calling that out. Trying to show those out there who are maybe feeling a little bit lost and confused about what's going on in the world, how we should be looking at this false binary.
The federal government has been operated as a criminal enterprise on a financial basis, period.
This network of organized crime and intelligence agencies that have essentially fused their operations.
Like the British directly put their hand, like one of those long rubber gloves, right through the State Department into the middle of the CIA. And that's been going on longer than I've been alive.
Key is convergence between East and West.
Two factions of a deep state competition take place to steer the military-industrial complex in this way or that way.
We've shown you NASA, artificial intelligence, Google, quantum computing. They are embedded together.
I don't think we've ever faced anything as all-pervasive and totalitarian in its scope.
And they're going to go ahead and profit from that until somebody takes that business away from them.
I love you guys. That's why I make videos, because I care. I care about us. I care about now. I care about the future. I care about these things. These are the most important concepts we have as a human race.
I very much think the community is making waves. And it's not just our community, man. It is people that are, for the first time in their lives, finding the courage to call these things out. And I think the power structure is afraid of that.
Now, what do you actually do about it? That, to me, is always the bigger question, right? Because we can recognize that they are there, but unless we choose to act, then they've already won.